This is the Shir by the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Masei number 2, and it's taught by Rochel. Did you realize that Hashem's mitzvahs are part of a plan that include Hashem taking excellent care of you? And by learning this Maimah that the Zera Shimshon explained, you will begin to feel on a deeper level how doing the mitzvahs and following Hashem's guide is so supportive of you as an individual and of the Jewish people, giving us so much ease and happiness and respect. All these things come flowing naturally when we do Hashem's will and we follow what He commands, because implicit in them is how much He looks after the Jewish people. So looking in Parsha Masei base, I encourage you to say the text with in Hebrew, because as you'll learn later on, saying the words aloud enables it to come through you, and the Torah is absorbed by you and through your whole body. It comes in and goes through you as you express it, and it changes you and transforms you and makes your life better. So this is based on the Passuk where it says, Vayichtav Moshe es motzaihem lemaseihem, which means Moshe, well, the normal explanation, I'm going to say how most people translate it. Vayichtav Moshe wrote down es motzaihem, the places where the Jewish people were in the desert, lemaseihem, according to their journeyings, al pi Hashem, which were all according to the way Hashem arranged it, ve'ele maseihem, and these are their journeys, lemotzaihem, according to the places where they encamped and stayed for a while. So now we're going to learn what the Zera Shimshon explains. Vayichtav Moshe es motzaihem lemaseihem. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the places where they stayed according to their journeyings, al pi Hashem, ve'ele maseihem lemotzaihem, which we just translated. Gosh, it's hard to understand something. Mahu hakefal, what is this repetitive sort of statement? What does it mean? Why does the Passuk seem to be saying the same thing, just in different forms at the beginning and at the end? First it says these are the places where they stayed according to their journeyings, then it says and these are the journeyings according to their places where they stayed. What new thing are we learning from these different expressions? V'od lama, and also why? Mitchila hikdim motzeihem. At the beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu said these are the places where they were relative to their travels. And then at the end, Levasoif hikdim maseihem, he said, oh, and these are their travels relative to the places where they were. So interesting, fascinating. What's the main point? Which is primary and which is secondary? It seems like there's different aspects happening here. So here the Zera Shimshon is explaining something very profound, very deep. If we look according to what the Mekubalim explained, and all these different journeys in the desert, they weren't just walking en route from Egypt to Eretz Yisrael. They were a particular experience that the Jewish people had to go through, because something very important was going to happen with these journeyings. There were certain negative spiritual forces that have a physical place in the world, and these live in the desert. And these are known as klipos, and they had a certain power, and as the Jewish people went past those places in the Midbar, their power was weakened and weakened and more weakened, because the Jewish people had such a were doing so many mitzvahs, and they were such spiritual people. As the Jewish people passed by, they reduced in their power. And these are called Nachash, Saraf, Va'akrav, V'tzimoin, etc. These have names. One is called Nachash, which is a snake. Saraf is a kind of, I'm guessing, a fiery serpent. Akrav is a scorpion. Tzimoin is thirst. And these are not necessarily just the things that we would translate them as. They were these horrible, awful, disgusting, fearsome spiritual powers, which just the Jewish people's presence there disintegrated them, diminished them. And as the Jewish people were there, they were forced to spit out the kedusha which they had stolen and which was inside their mouths. They had to remove it because they no longer were able to trap it, and the Jewish people could then extract that kedusha back, and it could go back to the Jewish people where it belonged. It had for some reason been split off from the Jewish people at the time, and from Kedusha, and from being used for the service of Hashem at the time of Adam HaRishon, when he did the original sin, and was now splintered off and in lots of different places. And as the Jewish people went in the Midbar, they recollected it back, they regathered it back, they magnetically attracted it back, and their spiritual power was able to pull it back to them and reduce the power of the negativity to keep it away from them. They were able to take all these holy sparks away from these negative spiritual powers. If the Jewish people hadn't sinned, and I'm not sure if this means the sin of the Egel Hazahav, when they sinned by worshipping the golden calf instead of waiting for Moshe Rabbeinu one more day, or if it was the sin of the Meraglim when they weren't so keen to go to Eretz Yisrael and they cried. I'm not sure. Probably it's the sin of the Egel, worshipping the golden calf. If they would only have been that spiritual power that they had been before they lost it by doing that, they would have been able to extract those spiritual sparks bisman mort in a very short time. They would have just been able to get them out and they would just like come to the place, and they did a collection experience perhaps, but it would have been almost nothing. They concentrate or whatever it is they had to do. They had to purify their hearts and minds, and these powers would have come back to the Jewish people. But because they had sinned, the Jewish people had sinned, in order to get back the kedusha and the spiritual mitzvahs that was possible, and the ability to understand whatever the kedusha represented, in order to have the awareness of trusting in Hashem, get it all back again the way it should, they had to spend a while in these places to get it back and to reabsorb it. It didn't just immediately come into them. And with this, the Passuk can be now understood. Moshe Rabbeinu scribed, he wrote down es moitzaehem lemaseihem. So I'm not going to translate those two words because he's going to explain what it means in a slightly different way than I said it before. He wrote down, which I said it meant their positions, the places where they stayed according to their journeys. But he says this means Shemilas moitzaehem. The word moitzaehem, Rochel, it could mean two different things. It's got two different meanings in the Torah. One is yitzia, one is leaving, from the root of leaving, something going out from somewhere else, like vayetze, and he went out. Or mitzia, and the second meaning of the word is locating, to be positioned in a certain place. Like if you've lost a lost property, then you're finding it. Mitzia is finding it by determining the place that it's in. So one is determining a place, and one is something leaving. As you can see, they've got very similar roots, but they're different meanings. So I had said that it means the second meaning, which is mitzia, which is finding, which is positioning, which is knowing where something is, the places where they were. But he says that it could mean both of these two things, and it can mean both of these two things simultaneously. As Chazal explain on the Passuk, which I believe is from Mishlei, Chaim Heim Lemotzaihem, this phrase means that the Torah gives life to those that find them. The words of the Torah give life to those that find them, that discover them, and just learning Torah, someone who can take a sefer and sit and focus on it, they give life to that person. And Chazal say in the Gemara and Eruvin, L'moitzion bapeh, so somebody who expresses it with their mouth. You don't just have to find the sefer and learn it, you actually have to say with the Hebrew words and say them with words, and then somehow I believe the kedusha comes through the person. It comes all the way like in at their feet and up through them and out through their mouth. I'm just saying that, which makes sense to me, I don't know, but as you say it from your mouth, more kedusha can come through you, and you become filled up with kedusha as a result of expressing out with your breath, using your mouth to say words of kedusha. More kedusha can come into you and fill you up. So Chaim Heim Lamotzaihem, they bring life to those that express them. So that's the root of extracting, of saying, taking something out, making the words come out of you. Va'afim nefarshehu lashon yitzia levad, and even if we only use this explanation of extracting, that moitzaehem means their extractions. The Jewish people took something out, which is presumably the kedusha, which had been swallowed by the power, negative spiritual forces, and if they did the yitzia, they managed to get it out from their mouths, this kedusha, which somehow they had swallowed, and they were keeping it locked, trapped inside, and the Jewish people were able to take it out, and possibly they did so by learning Torah, and somehow as they put it out of their mouths, it was not able to be held by these powerful spiritual forces. Even if we explain it as an expression of extracting, levad only and not positions, it will be from the conjugation which is called hofal. Hofal is when you have the passive voice of the hifel. So hifel is when you take something out. The hofal is, I think, the thing that has been taken out. The Hainu, in other words, Hanitzoitzois, these are the spiritual sparks of Kedusha Shahutza'u Me'osan and Mekomis, which were removed from those places. Hayu Muchanim Shom, were prepared and waiting there, Miyad, immediately. So they got taken out from the negative, the clippers, and they just were like piled up ready there, Miyad, they were ready there, Umamtinim Esamasais, and these were the only things that the journeys had to be arranged around. These were the focal points, the reasons why they were going from place to place. So they were the things that the journeyings had to wait till it happened, and it would have happened almost straight away. And these were the only delays that happened was as that took place and went through that. And if you say Imkain, if so, lo yeh Yisrael's man lanuach. If the Jewish people hadn't sinned and they would be going to each place and immediately collecting the Kedusha, then they would have no time to rest. They've just done a whole long journey. They're arriving. Shahari miyad sheyagiu, for behold, as soon as they arrive, le'ezah makom, immediately when they arrived to a certain place, you like to hakol, they would collect everything. Umiyad hayalahem lisa lemokom acher, and immediately they would have to journey to another place, bli menucha, without any rest. Al zeh amar hakosov, and that's for this practical, sensible, human understanding reason. The Passuk says, Vayichtov Moshe es motza'ehim. And Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down an itinerary, a list, a place name listing, an itinerary of the places where these extraction sites were, as rest stops. Shahayu mamtinim es hamasa'os. These were the delays between the journeys. These were causing the journeys to be a little bit later. These were the gaps in between the journeys. V'zehu l'masa'ehim, and that's why it says for their journeys, on behalf of their journeys, on behalf of their journeying, to be comfortable, so that they could have a hotel stay in between two long journeys and have a rest and regroup and relax and just be people without doing another job straight after the first job. And it would not have been a great, massive effort for the Jewish people. And we know this because the Jewish people were going according to Hashem's words. What does this mean? Kalaimar, in other words, Sheyelchu mimasa lamasa, al pi Hashem. They were going from one journey to the next journey, al pi Hashem. So what was it that Hashem has said? According to Hashem's command, well, if you look back, then soon after they went out of Mitzrayim, Kamasha Kosev, as it says in Parsha Yisrael, Va'esa eschem al kanfei nesharim. Do not worry, Hashem says, I carried you, as you've been going out of Mitzrayim, I carried you on the wings of eagles. I carried you on the wings of eagles. Now, when a person is doing something which is kadosh, then their legs might be on the ground, but they're so inspired and they're so trusting in Hashem that they feel like they're being carried. It's not an effort. They're carried along, and they're so inspired by it. It helps move them. Like if you've ever been part of an important project, you just go through the actions without it being an exhausting experience. And perhaps this is similar that says about the Aron HaKodesh, that it was noiseus of it. It carried its own carriers. They were holding on to it, but it carried them. It rose into the air, and the Levium who were carrying it would float. So Hashem says, don't worry, I'm taking you to Eretz Yisrael. It's not supposed to be an effort. It's not going to be an effort. I carry you on eagle's wings. Al pi ma she'amar Hashem, exactly the way Hashem had said the journeying experience was going to be. V'lo yisbelu tarach gadol. They should not have had to suffer any great effort in the travelling and then collecting things and then moving on. It would have been manageable. It would have been balanced. It would have been beloved. It would have been a positive experience. All this would have happened if the Jewish people had not sinned and would be in that pure state where they could immediately sit down, focus on the Torah, and all the Kedusha would just suddenly, like a magnet, just like suddenly pour into them and come back to the rightful place. But then, being that the Jewish people had sinned, they had done the Avera, it comes to the last part of the Passuk, Ve'ele Maseihem l'motza'ehem. These, instead, were the journeys that they had to make, the incredibly long delayed journeys, l'motza'ehem, and the reason why they were so long and challenging. Well, actually, the reason why they were delayed was because I'm not going to translate that because I will go to the next words. Masei hayu mamtinim, because the journeys were delayed. They were delayed until they had managed to extract all these sparks of Kedusha, which was a massive big effort and a very long time. They would gradually collect them. So they would do the spiritual acts. Maybe it was mitzvahs, maybe it was learning Torah, maybe it was davening, maybe it was chesed to one another, whatever it was they did which helped the Kedusha come back to the Jewish people. This didn't take 5 minutes, and it took much longer until it all gradually was recollected by them. So, Ele Maseihem, Lemotzaihem, now the focus is that they had, the journeys had to be arranged around the places and the experiences of extracting the Kedusha. So originally the places of collecting Kedusha were arranged around the journeyings. They were supposed to have been an experience of rest for the sake of the journeying, to be comfortable. And then it says at the end of the Passuk, Ve'ele Maseihem Lemotzaihem, but these were the journeys that had to be arranged around the stopping places, because the stopping places took a really long time and were quite delayed. So as we can see, there was 2 different plans, and they are both written about in this Passuk. Plan A was it would have happened easy, immediately, Kedusha, collecting experiences in each place, and a refreshing rest in those places. That's Plan A. As it says, Vayichtav Moshe es motzaihem lemaseihem. He wrote down these place names for their journeyings, al pi Hashem, which was how Hashem wanted them to have that positive experience. And in fact, it still happened. They still did have the rest places in the stopping places where they were doing the job of mining the Kedusha from these places. They still had the experience of these places being a nice rest, but they had to work hard on these places as well. So Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down where these Kedusha extraction sites were, which were also important as they were designated resting places before each next journey, just like Hashem had arranged for them, just like Hashem had told them, I carried you on eagle's wings. But because we were not so kadosh, we didn't have that degree of holiness where automatically we just collect all Kedusha. There was Plan B, a long, arduous Kedusha collecting experiences. We had to do lots of mitzvahs with delayed travel until they finished, and it reminds me a bit of the experiences that we have in Golus now. In each place we're here for tens of years, for hundreds of years, and gradually we're recollecting the Kedusha back of that place, each country, each town, each city, and becoming better people with the Kedusha which was inherently ours originally, and learning, being able to absorb it back into ourselves again. Ve'ele Maseihem Lemotzaihem. So this is expressed with the last few words of the Passuk, and these are their journeys which depended on how long they needed to take extracting all the Kedusha from these places, which they could only do the journeys when they finished. And that's how the Passuk isn't repetitious at all, but is explaining very important things for Yidden to understand of how they were in the Midbar, what the point of being in the Midbar was, and how that parallels our life today. And do you realize that Hashem's mitzvahs, when Hashem asks us to do mitzvahs, He's totally taken into account our physical needs, and as we focus on asking Him to help us do it properly, He gives us the wherewithal to manage, because it was always part of the plan that our physical needs should be taken care of as well, in a lovely, kind, concerned way for everything that we need. Hashem takes excellent care of you because you matter in every dimension. And the other lesson, which is really important, is when we learn the Zera Shimshon or we learn any Torah, then to say it out loud, and that brings Kedusha into ourselves, it expresses it out of us, brings it into us, brings Chaim to us, as opposed to these nitzotzes of Kedusha which sort of like swallow the Kedusha whole, the clippers which swallow the Kedusha whole and they just lock it inside. We don't do that. We express it, pass it on to other people, pass it on to yourself, say it aloud, and more Torah comes through you and it helps us to deeply absorb the meaning, and it's a positive bracha for ourselves and the world. Thank you.